Well, good evening and welcome to our midweek Bible study as we continue our study through the Gospel of Mark. This past week, we began a series talking about the mission upon which Jesus sends us. And we looked at His mission and our mission. And that was Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. I want you to pick back up with me beginning in verse 14. While you're turning there, just give you kind of some insight. A couple of weeks ago, the AC at our house, the compressor blew up. And so we were in a situation where we were going to have to replace the whole system. Now, for those of you who know, that's a big chunk of change. That is very costly. But one thing I know about myself is, for me personally, it would be far more costly emotionally and relationally and even physically if I had to go through the summer without an AC unit. You count the cost and you determine, I'm going to pay this price so that I don't have to pay that price. As we look at tonight's passage, I want us to think about the cost of serving God on mission in the world. The cost of serving Him, but also the cost of not serving Him. You see, as followers of Jesus Christ, brought into God's family through faith in Christ, as those who have been commissioned by Jesus to be His ambassadors in our world, 2 Corinthians 5, we have a duty, we have a calling, we have a responsibility to fulfill our mission, to serve God on mission in our world every single day. That is our calling. And although, as we see tonight, it's going to be costly, it would be far more costly if we were disobedient to God. I know that as we look at this, it's going to seem, well, that just really doesn't make much sense. I mean, God's gracious and He's loving, and He's going to be okay if I'm not fulfilling the mission. Yeah, the pain of disappointing the one who has saved us and given us life and rescued us from death and rescued us from hell should be greater in us than the pain or the cost of serving God on mission, the cost of time and relationally and emotionally and physically. I pray that by the end we begin to pick up the courage to serve God on mission in our world. All right, so 6, 1 through 13, 6, 1 through 6, Mark 6, 1 through 6, Jesus goes to Nazareth, and as He's ministering in Nazareth, fulfilling the mission, even though He knew that the people in His hometown, His small town of Nazareth, He knew that they would reject Him, not believe in Him, be offended by Him, scandalizo, that they would be offended by Him, and that they would essentially reject Him. He still went to Nazareth on mission, even in the face of that rejection. And then in 6 through 13, He calls His disciples together and He sends them on mission. So it's Jesus' mission, and it's the mission of His disciples, and it's our mission. Now, in verse 14, there seems to be this interlude. Now, if I could just shape the picture for you a little bit. In Mark 6:14, we see that Mark tells the story of John the Baptist being beheaded. And then in verse 30, the apostles that Jesus sent out come back and report to Him. So in the way Mark wrote, there are these sandwiches of stories. You have the story of sending on mission in 6:13, and the report back in 6:30. And now in Mark 6:14 through 29, you have the story of John the Baptist being beheaded. And it's more than just an interlude. The way Mark is writing, he's trying to show us something about being on mission through the story of John the Baptist. He's showing us the cost of serving serving God on mission in the world by the example of John the Baptist. All right, so let's look at verses 14 through 16. Now King Herod heard of him, being Jesus. They heard of Jesus, for his name had become well known. And Herod said, John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him. But others said, it is Elijah, and others said, it is the prophet, or like one of the prophets. But when Herod heard about Jesus, he said, this is John, whom I beheaded. He's been raised from the dead. I want us to hear something about what people were saying about Jesus. Jesus is well known now. Herod is probably here in Tiberias and in his palace, and he hears about Jesus, and fear grips his heart. He's anxious because he killed John the Baptist. Now, you go back all the way to Mark chapter 1, verse 14. Verse 14 tells us that when or after John had been put in prison, Jesus came preaching the good news of the kingdom. So verse 14 of Mark 1, we see John's put in prison. And we don't get any more of that story until Mark chapter 6. But as we lead into that story, we get a glimpse into what people are saying about Jesus. Some say that Jesus is John the Baptist resurrected in power in this person, that it's John the Baptist doing work through this guy, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, that's what some were saying. Others were saying this is a prophet, or one in the long succession or long line of the prophetic tradition who speaks and acts on behalf of God. That's who Jesus is. Or some say this is Elijah. Now, Elijah, Malachi chapter 3, talks about how that there would be a prophet who would come, who would declare the day of the Lord. So this is the eschatological, big word. This is the prophet that was to come, that the people expected would come, who would announce God's day of vengeance on the Roman Empire. So some say, all right, this is John the Baptist reenacted in the person of Jesus. Or this is a prophet in the long line of prophetic tradition, speaking and acting on behalf of God. And then others say, well, this is Elijah announcing the day of the Lord and the day of the Lord's vengeance. And so that's kind of what people were saying about Jesus. Herod, however, Herod was filled with fear because he had beheaded John the Baptist. So when he hears about Jesus, who is well known in the region by this time, when he hears about Jesus, he thinks, John's come to get me. John's come to get me. Isn't that so much like when you do something wrong and it could be years or decades, and then the fear hasn't gone away and something triggers that fear and you say, they've come to get me. Now that's where Herod was. And so we see this picture. Now, Herod Antipas, that's the guy here, he ruled in Galilee and Perea from AD 4 BC to AD 39. He's the son of Herod the Great, who had the great slaughter of 2-year-olds back in the Christmas story. He's the son of Herod the Great. Herod Antipas is, he wants to be king, but he's only a tetrarch, although he's named king here. And he was fearful because when he hears about Jesus, he's thinking about John, which then sparks the story about how John the Baptist was killed. So let's pick back up in verse 17. Mark chapter 6, verse 17. For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him, and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. All right, so first scenario. Mark says that Herodias, who was the wife of Philip, the brother of Herod, is now Herod's wife. Okay, bad news. Verse 18. Because John had said to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So in this context, it's real simple. Herod heard John announce it's not lawful for Herod to be married to Herodias. It's against the will of God. Something that any faithful minister of the gospel would say. It's unlawful. And so what does Herod do? Herod arrests John the Baptist. But, verse 19, Herodias held it against John the Baptist and wanted to kill John the Baptist, but she couldn't. So Herod puts John in prison. Herodias wants him dead. Now, why did Herod not immediately execute John the Baptist? Verse 20, for Herod feared John, knowing that John was a just and holy man. So Herod protected John from death. And when he listened to John, he pondered greatly and heard him gladly. All right, so here's the scenario. We look back, Mark 1:14. Herod hears that John said it's unlawful for Herod to be married to Herodias because Herodias was married to Herod's brother. And so Mark 1:14, Herod arrests John the Baptist, puts him in prison. Herodias wants him dead. And holds it against him. She is plotting and scheming. How can I do away with John the Baptist? But Herod will not execute John the Baptist, holds him in prison. Now, the reason he doesn't execute him is, number one, because he's afraid of John the Baptist. He's afraid of the power at work in John the Baptist. He sees that John the Baptist is a just man and a holy man. Maybe he's afraid if he executes John the Baptist, that'll be one bridge too far. The people will rise up and revolt against Herod. So that's one reason. Another reason he doesn't execute John is because when John spoke, Herod was drawn to his speaking. He's drawn to what John the Baptist had to say. He wasn't drawn so much that he would change his life or get right with God, but he was drawn to what John the Baptist said. So, as a result, he protected John the Baptist. So let's pick up the rest of the story. Verse 21. Then an opportune day came when Herod on his birthday gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced, now this is Salome, Salome. This is Herodias' daughter. We don't know if this is the daughter of Herodias with Philip or the daughter of Herodias with Herod. Probably this is Philip's daughter, not Herod's daughter. But regardless, she comes in and she dances. It doesn't say that she danced in a provocative way, but she probably did. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him, the king said to the girl. Now, the term girl here in verse 22 is the same word used to describe Jairus' daughter in Mark chapter 5. It's a teenager, a 12-year-old. When Herod was pleased, the king said to the girl, "Ask me whatever you want, and I'll give it to you." And he swore it to her. "Whatever you ask me, I'll give you up to half my kingdom," which is hyperbole because he couldn't give away any of his kingdom. It really wasn't his to give. He was only ruling it on behalf of Caesar. Verse 24, so Salome went out and said to Herodias, her mother, "What shall I ask?" And Herodias was ready. And she said, "You ask for the head of John the Baptist." And immediately Salome came in with haste to the king and said, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." And the king was exceedingly sorry, yet because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he didn't want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded John's head to be brought, and he went and beheaded John the Baptist in prison, brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. And when the disciples heard of it, they came and they took away his corpse and laid it in a tomb. So why tell the story of the death of John the Baptist, which is the longest narration, except for the longest narration in the Gospels about how John the Baptist died? Why is it that Mark includes it, goes to great pains to tell this story? It's because this story helps us understand more about what it means to serve God on mission in our world and the cost that's attached. So I want us to close out this story. Now, there are a lot of things we could say within the framework of the story, but I want us to just close with two ideas. The first idea is that we serve God on mission under the shadow of the cross. We serve God on mission under the shadow of the cross. The cross itself is what is centerpiece to serving God on mission. When we go on mission, we're not going for ourselves. We're going for the one who sent us. And the one who sent us is the one who died on the cross for our sin and was raised from the dead. When we look at the story of John the Baptist, some have suggested, and I see it as part of the reason, that John the Baptist's death is a foreshadowing of the death of Jesus. You just think about it. One scholar guy named Larry Hurtado is the one who gives great detail on this, but in his commentary on Mark, pages 82 and 83, he says that the death of John the Baptist foreshadows the death of Jesus, and here's how. First, he's executed by Herod, just as Jesus is executed by civil authority, Pilate. Second, we see Herod hesitating to execute John the Baptist for months and months, or maybe even years, holding him in prison, but hesitating, not wanting to do it. Even verse 26, king was exceedingly sad, yet because of his oaths and because the crowd around him, he determined he would go ahead and behead John the Baptist. So Herod was hesitant. In the same way, Pilate was hesitant. What wrong has this man done? I see no fault in him. I'm washing my hands. I'll go ahead and do it. I don't want to, but I'll go ahead and do it. So that's a second similarity. A third similarity is just as Herodias had plotted and planned, holding against John the Baptist what he had said, that she was living in sin, holding against him what John the Baptist had said. She plots and schemes and plans and is ready for the day when she can pounce. In the same way, the chief priests of the Sanhedrin plotted and planned together how they could pounce and send Jesus to his death. A final comparison, foreshadowing perhaps, is verse 29. When John the Baptist's disciples heard of John the Baptist's death, they came and took away the corpse and laid it in a tomb. The term tomb there is the same word for tomb or grave in Mark's account of the crucifixion of Jesus. In the same way that the disciples came and gathered the body of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea, a follower of Jesus, took Jesus' body, put it in a tomb, and the disciples lady disciples came early the next morning when the Sabbath was done to anoint the body. So again, all those comparisons, certainly right and true. But if I could just kind of back out of all those details and just say it like this, Jesus came on a mission to die. Just as he was rejected in Nazareth in Mark chapter 6, verse 2, 3, 4, and 5, just as he's rejected in Nazareth, Jesus understood that he would be killed on a cross. And the cost of serving God's glory was the cross. The cost of fulfilling the mission that God had sent him on was the cross. This is John 17. Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son might also glorify you, that for you have given him authority over all flesh, that he should give eternal life to as many as you have given to him. And this is eternal life, that they might know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. I finished the work you've given me to do. The next chapter, Jesus is arrested. The next chapter, Jesus is killed. And Jesus understood that he came to die. Mark 10, a few chapters from now, Jesus said, "For the Son of Man has come not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Jesus wasn't looking for the entitlement of the throne. Jesus was looking for the suffering of the cross. It is through that suffering that you and I have a chance at life. It is through that suffering, through Jesus fulfilling his mission of dying in our place for our sin upon a cross, that brings us into God's family and moves us on mission. It is the shadow of the cross that should inform every part of our day. And certainly as John the Baptist's death foreshadows the death of Christ, it should spark in our hearts a passion not to run from the shadow of the cross, but to hide in the shadow of the cross. It's what the Apostle Paul meant when he said in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, "For I'm not ashamed, for the message of the cross is foolishness for those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved," you and me, "it is the power of God." And today we look to the cross and we see the cost of the cross for Christ. We look to the cross and we live under its shadow and its shade, understanding that the cross that Jesus carried was for our salvation. So we pick up that cross every day. We pick up that cross, that mission of sharing the good news of God's rescuing love through faith in Christ every day. If anyone desires to come after me, Jesus will say in just a couple of chapters, Mark 9. Mark 8, if anybody desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, what the story of John the Baptist says to us is that living on mission, serving God on mission, means that we live under the shadow of the cross. It is the instrument of torture, but it is also the instrument of salvation. The second thing that we see in this passage, not only do we serve under the shadow of the cross, but we serve God on mission regardless the cost to us personally. We serve God on mission regardless the cost to us personally. The death of John the Baptist also foreshadows the cost of following Jesus on mission. I know that we live, my goodness, I'm talking about an air conditioning. And how uncomfortable I would be if I had to live through a summer without air conditioning. We live in a world where comforts, man, they mean a lot to us. But as followers of Jesus in this world, we must be willing, ready, able, committed to let go our comforts for the sake of the mission. Look at John the Baptist. Can I just point you to what he means to the mission? Like John the Baptist, we must represent God faithfully, courageously, without compromise. In the face of opposition, ridicule, rejection, or death itself, we must proclaim the truth of the gospel as faithful ambassadors of our King. John the Baptist knew it was going to cost him something to call people to repentance, to say that the axe is now laid at the root of the tree, to say to Herod himself, you are living in sin. But he didn't back up, he didn't bend, he didn't compromise. He spoke the truth of God, even though it was going to cost him. And today, you and I must carry that same commitment. That we will be faithful to the mission to speak the truth of the gospel, not compromise, not back up. In the face of opposition, ridicule, rejection, or death, we will be faithful to serve God on mission today. One scholar said it this way, like the courageous prophets before him, John understood that the proclamation of God's word included moral responsibility. There were no sacred cows in his herd. He did not read the polls before speaking and acting. He protected no special interest, nor did he predicate what he said and did on chances of success. John's was a costly courage. Today, my prayer for you and for me is that we would get up out of our desire and the designs that we have to prioritize comfort, and that we would say, not for my way of life, but for the glory of God, I will proclaim the truth of God in the face of every opposition, in the face of ridicule, in the face of even death itself. I can be rejected, I can be mocked, and I can be imprisoned, and it's going to be okay because I serve God on mission every day. Now, we can make those bold proclamations, but here's the question. Will you walk across the street, knock on a door, and tell your neighbor, can I share with you what Jesus means to me? We make bold proclamations, but those bold proclamations are only lived out in the everyday life, just like John the Baptist did. So we count the cost. We serve God on mission because the cost of displeasing Him is too great. Or we count the cost and say the cost of serving God on mission is just too high. Which cost will you choose? Now, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. God bless you. Good night.